Maryland men's basketball defeats Michigan 64-57 here at Xfinity Center Thursday night. I'm Emmett Siegel here with Andrew Chodes on the Testudo Talk podcast. An instant reaction. We haven't done one of these in a while, and this was quite a game to react to. Really sloppy first half, but then the Terps kind of come alive in the second half and get the job done. You know, Kevin Willard said it himself in the post-game press conference. Pretty much every game for this team is going to be a must-win moving forward, the way that they've set themselves up, with the way they've played early in the season. And today, it really felt like they were doomed. But, we'll get into the ins and outs of the games. But it was really Dante Scott, it felt like, for me, that came alive. And Maryland comes away with a much-needed home victory.
Yeah, the second half was definitely worth the price of admission. It was pretty crazy. I mean, kind of just everything was kind of falling for Maryland. Dante Scott, like you mentioned, he made 4 threes in a row in the second half. I believe he had 18 points in the second half. It was either, I think, 18 or 20.
20 points.
20 points in the second half. So absolutely ridiculous. And his most thunderous 2 points of the game came in the first few minutes when he had that highlight reel dunk where he brought the house down. That was incredible. But yeah, Maryland just what a weird game, but it kind of encompasses what the season's been all about, right? It's the offenses. There's still no rhythm to it. The shots, yeah, they fell against a shorthanded and struggling Michigan squad in the second half. But in the first half, you only made 8 shots. You went 1 of 11 from 3. You only scored 21 points. I jokingly tweeted out that Maryland football scored more points in the first quarter of the Music City Bowl, or equal that total that Maryland scored in the first half of this game. So the struggles were definitely there, but in the second half, a lot went right. And thankfully for Maryland, they survived and they got a must need a win.
Yeah, and apologies for any background noise. They're setting up Xfinity Center for a gymnastics meet tomorrow. But yeah, it was like you said, the first half was about as bad as you could possibly expect for Maryland. It just was kind of a microcosm of all the things that have gone wrong for them this year, just compacted into one half. The shooting was bad, the turnovers were bad. Yeah. They were not getting defensive stops at the consistency that they would like. Although they were early on, I think it was 10-6.
Well, it was
with 10 minutes to go in the first half.
Yeah, it was 7-6 at the under 16 timeout. It was 7-6 at the under 12 timeout, and then it was 10-6 halfway through the first half. So, yeah, really ugly. And the fans didn't start booing until like the end of the first half. If I was a fan, I would have started booing with 15 minutes to go in the first half. It was really ugly. Both teams couldn't get a shot to fall. But then kind of as the game went on, Maryland really wore out Michigan, I think is kind of the best way to put it. Michigan without their leading scorer, Doug McDaniels, they were obviously hurting in that department. And just as the game went on, Michigan, they couldn't really get anything to fall. Juju Reese was really good defensively in the second half, especially late. He had a few crucial blocks. But yeah, Maryland kind of just hung on, and then they kind of started to find the rhythm as the game went on.
Yeah, and you talked about Dante Scott, but I'll just echo that. I mean, Dante Scott today has kind of continued what has been a pretty promising trend for him. Yeah. To start the season, there were rightfully a lot of people complaining about the play of Dante Scott. The overwhelming sentiment from the team was, he's practicing well, but he's not playing well in the games. But today, I mean, you really can't say enough about what he did. Those 22nd half points. I mean, this team was down 12 at the half. Yeah. Those 22nd half points really put you over the edge. And those threes were crucial. You mentioned the dunk in the first half. That was great. But, it was really that second half where he came alive. He had a left-handed hook shot. He had a couple free throws. It was just, pretty much one of those things where you're just in a zone. Sometimes in basketball it happens, and it happened to happen with him today, where you're just in a zone and everything you put up goes in. It felt like that for Dante Scott. Like you said, Julian Reese, really impressive today. Had a double-double. Those stops towards the end were crucial. And then,
I think we got to shout out Dayshawn Harris-Smith. I think he had his best game of the season. I know on the stat sheet it might not have shown he only had 10 points and 5 rebounds, but he was outstanding on both ends of the floor. He played all but 5 minutes of the game, so I think he played the second most minutes out of any Terp, or third most behind Jameer and Juju. He was really excellent. He was driving to the hoop, especially early in the second half. He was kind of the catalyst to that early push, which kind of got them back in the game. And even he mentioned post-game, he felt really comfortable as the game went on. And so for him, I think that's a really encouraging sign for Maryland fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, him, and this was another note post-game, but him and Jamie Kaiser playing as many minutes as they did. I mean,
both over 30.
Yeah, you're without Jahari Long, so, you're expecting some other guys to get a lot of run, maybe more than you're used to, but to have 2 freshmen play that big of a role is kind of it could go either way, right? It could be a complete disaster, or it could go very well. Today I thought Deshaun played really well. I mean, Jamie had his moments. He had 2 threes in the second half that were
they were
yeah.
timely.
I mean, yeah, those threes were big and part of Maryland's second half push to really, kind of get them across the finish line, because they were dead in the water, and then they make this push and it's a back and forth game, and then Michigan's trying to make a comeback, and those threes really helped. But just to have the confidence in those two guys and to see it really pan out in a conference game is really, really promising. This team has to go on the road now for 2 straight games before Michigan State comes back here to College Park. So you got to find a way to carry this momentum onto the road. You're hoping that Jahari Long is back because he provides some much needed guard depth. But overall, the freshman really good today. And Jameer Young, it was weird, not his finest game. Maryland, for the most part this year, has kind of been a 1 or 2 man team, maybe a 1.5 man team with mostly Jameer Young and then Julian Reese at times as well. Tonight was not the Jameer Young show like we've seen some other times. What do you have? 12 points, 14 points, something like that.
Jameer finished with 12 points, but he missed a couple pretty easy layups. He missed one pretty clear cut dunk. He missed shots that he usually makes, but it happens, and for other guys to contribute, especially Dante Scott, like you mentioned, has to be a positive sign for Terps fans.
Yeah, I mean, the question after they lost to Purdue here, obviously Purdue on a completely different level than Michigan. Michigan reeling right now. That's 5 straight losses for Michigan. The Doug McDaniel suspension. There's just a lot going on with that program that it seems like they're really trying to figure it out. But the Purdue win. Or the Purdue loss, I should say, for Maryland. You got like 25 points from Jameer Young. I think it was 26, if I remember correctly. And you come out on a losing effort of that. To get only 12 points from Jameer Young and win against a conference opponent at home is pretty promising. If they had lost this game, it was only a couple point difference. If they lose this game, then it's, the discussion is completely different.
The final score was 64-57. I don't think we said that yet.
Yeah, I think I said it right at the beginning, but yeah, I mean, this was a close game against a team that's really not playing very good basketball right now. So, these are the games you have to win if you're Maryland, if you want to try and turn this thing around. I think I said it at the beginning, but once again, pretty much every game is a must win for Maryland at this point, especially those home games. You don't really have a lot of margin for error with the way they've set this season up. So, this was a game you needed to win. It looked like it was over, and then Dante Scott kind of rescues you. Julian Reese with a really strong second half. I think most of his points were in the second half as well. Just overall, a much, much needed result.
We don't have to go so in depth into this, but I do want to mention Kevin Miller's post game comments. I thought they were really interesting about just kind of how the team's going. Some more specifics about the game. I know you mentioned kind of the defensive pressure and how they've adjusted. What were your takeaways kind of from his comments today?
I mean, I think that it was, in that second half, and this was the question I posed to him in the second half, when Maryland started to make a run back into the game, it really thrived off of making the game really sloppy, making the game really hectic. They established that full court pressure once the shots started falling, especially once the threes started falling from Scott. And they were able to turn that into points. Julian Reese had a steal and score. There were a couple times where, bodies were flying. They were able to jump on some loose balls. My biggest takeaway from today's game is that Maryland kind of has to win ugly against a lot of teams this year. I mean, you're not going to be able to, outscore teams. We know that. I mean, they put up 64 points today, but there was a time where it looked like the football team was going to outscore them against Michigan. And, today was not the finest showing, but you come out with a win. Maryland can't really replicate this against better teams, but the formula at least is there for Maryland to kind of slop the game up. And you've seen it from some other teams, some other coaches around the country that have had success, that have had, done well with maybe less talented rosters, kind of overachieved by just kind of making teams play their game. Obviously it helps to start making those shots so you can set up that press, but like, if Maryland is going to win games against some teams, like I said, you got Michigan State coming in here. You got Illinois, who, even though they're down Terrence Shannon, at least for now, I don't know what his legal situation is. You got some tough teams coming up. If you want to have a chance against those teams, you got to make them play your game, because you're not going to be able to outscore teams. You got to kind of slap the game up and turn it into just a helter-skelter game where you can thrive in transition and maybe get some opportunistic shots.
Yeah, and it's not just that. I mean, even if you look at the losses to Indiana and Villanova, I mean, the defense has shown it's good enough to compete with really most teams in the conference. It's if some shots fall, the defense is usually good enough to kind of hold the opponent in check. If Maryland's able just to hit a few of the open threes or even just the open jumpers that they're missing, I'm not saying they're going to win 10 of their next 12, but I'm saying maybe they can finish. Right now they're 2-3 in conference play. maybe they can finish a game or two or three above 500. I think that's kind of the goal right now, just based on how poor the season started.
Well, I think the best case you can hope for with Maryland, realistically, assuming there's not going to be some miraculous run where they win 15 straight games. The best realistic outcome you can hope for with Maryland is to put yourself in position to be in position by the end of the year, right? Put yourself in a position where you can play yourself back onto the NCAA tournament bubble, where you can put yourself in a
long way to go.
Long way to go. But if you can put yourself in a position where you win enough games to at least put yourself in the conversation, where the last couple games of the regular season, you got some winnable games at the end of regular season, and then the Big Ten tournament comes around, where maybe you can play yourself in, right? And like games like this are games you can't afford to lose. I don't know exactly what we think. I think they got to win at least one of those road games coming up. Once you start losing home games, Michigan State's a good team playing better basketball than they were at the beginning of the season. But you can't really You can't really lose any more road game or home games, I should say. Excuse me. The road games are really going to be the X factor. We saw what happened in Minnesota. It wasn't pretty. They blew that game. There's no way around it. They blew that game. Those are the kind of games that hold you back. And today, I think the best way we can describe today's game, or at least the best way I would describe it, is that Maryland escaped with a win at home against a pretty bad team. It kind of felt like we're in the same place as when we were, almost in the same exact seat doing the Penn State post-game reaction, where I'm like, that performance doesn't get the job done against pretty much any other team in the Big Ten. That's what it felt like today. It felt like you're lucky that you were playing Michigan today, because the way that Maryland was shooting the ball in that first half, Michigan wasn't doing all too much better. If Maryland's playing, say, Michigan State, they already played Purdue. Illinois is pretty good, pretty explosive. You got some good teams in this conference.
30-point game.
Yeah, the game is over at halftime. Even though it felt like, Maryland wasn't trending the right way at this, at halftime of this game, that was because Maryland wasn't playing well. But Michigan wasn't playing well either. If you play a team that has that firepower, it's not going to go well at all for you. So they got a lot to figure out. It's a lot more positive after a win. But man, this was an ugly game. We even got the Sickos committee starting to like tweets and tweet about this game. It was that kind of game. You mentioned it, but how often do you see media timeout to media timeout with 0 points combined?
Yeah, I think to wrap this one up, I think an ugly victory, a must. It was such an important game for Maryland to have. They needed to have it. They got it. It was very ugly. They got the win that they needed so desperately. And now you look at 2 games on the road against Illinois, who's one of the best teams in the country, and then Northwestern, who show that they can knock off some of the top teams like they did against
tough
Purdue.
Team to be on the road too.
To beat on the road. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's good parting thoughts. Today at Xfinity, it was they pretty much did just what they needed to do to win, right? This isn't going to fly on the road. This isn't going to fly against better teams. But at the end of the day, a win is a win. You'll take it. It snaps their short losing streak and, gets another win in the Big Ten, which always helps. And it's another step towards what they hope is turning the season around. But these road games and that game against Michigan State, and then, a couple more to end the month will really tell you where this team is, heading into February and heading down the home stretch. That's all for me. Andrew, you want to sign us off?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, send us out.
Thank you for listening to the Testudo Talk podcast. We will be back after the Maryland's road trip.
Yeah, we'll be back with some more coverage. As the season goes on, me and Andrew, Colin is done for the year. He's off in Europe. He's in Italy a couple months after the basketball team. He missed them by a couple months.
Wow,
but everyone wish Colin well. Me and Andrew will be here holding it down for the rest of the season. And thanks everyone for listening. We will see you after Maryland gets back from its road trip.